Okay, for people who are joining us on the live stream, this is an internal design meeting that's part of our language completeness and consistency series. We have now happily wrapped version 11.3, so this is discussion of things for future versions beyond 11.3. Okay, let's pick up the first item. Read list versus read string, read byte array. What on earth is all of this? Is this different behaviors of these different functions?
You're right. So if you have an empty file and you just say read a file, you get end a file, which is basically the only thing read can do, because read opens the file and attempts to read the first expression, and then it leaves it open. If you call read list on this empty file, you get an empty list because it didn't read anything. And the behavior of read list is to open the file, read everything it can, close the file. So I would have expected read string to behave the same way as read list. If you ask it to read string an empty file, it opens it up, says, oh, there's nothing here, return a null string, and then closes the file. Now, it does the first and the last of the steps, but in the middle, it returns end of file. Now...
Okay, hold on. Let me understand that. So is there a difference between... So a file that doesn't exist is going to give an error. So correct. This is actually an empty file.
Yep.
So why on earth isn't it returning just a null string?
Right. So
is it a bug?
So this is arguably a bug. The documentation says that when the source has been exhausted, it returns end of file.
Well, what's this about buffers? And a buffer of available content. What's that about? That for device files?
Yeah, so that would be if you're trying to read from a processor, some kind of buffer, any kind of stream with a buffer, rather, so that it has an end of that specific buffer rather than the entire file itself.
But but aren't there different kinds of files? Aren't there files where it either is a string where you can definitively read it? Wait a minute, it's reading to a terminator, right? So that's the other case here. So your argument is, go ahead. I mean, there could be a read string that gives end of buffer, but you can't read string again, right? Because it does the open close business. Is that right?
Well, no. So if it's reading from a process or stream that is already open, then it doesn't close it. It just goes from the current point.
I see. So then multiple read strings could at one time return end of buffer and at a later time return content because the buffer got extended.
Right, although they don't actually return end of buffer, they return an empty string.
Well, it says they return end of... Oh, the terminator can say end of buffer.
Right.
Oh, okay, so that's the specification of the terminator, which is different from the specification of what it returns, correct?
Correct. And so, right. And so there are certainly cases, right? So you might want to distinguish between, oh, is there just nothing, right? Or suppose you say read until you encounter a new line, but you're right at the new line. So you might get an empty string back. So it certainly makes a certain amount of sense that you can sort of differentiate between, right? There's an
end of file.
I'm at the end of file.
Yes, as opposed to just to the terminator, there was nothing to read.
Correct.
So that's not completely stupid then.
Exactly. But what I think we could do is special case when read string opens, reads a whole file, and then closes it. And if that file happens to be empty, rather than returning end of file, returning an empty string. Right. So if the
I agree that case seems very awkward. But why not special case the one argument form, right? Because the two argument form is the only case where end of file is a useful differentiator, right? In the one argument case, there's no read to terminator. In the one argument case, it's just going to gulp the whole thing.
Right. Although you might already be at end of file.
Or what if you set time constraints to something? Then you might want to differentiate between I hit the end of the file and I ran out of time to read the whole file, or to even read anything from the file.
Yes.
So Jeremy, are you suggesting we shouldn't special case anything, or just that we should restrict to the open close case?
We might not want to special case anything, but at least in the single argument case, we would not want to special case it if it had a finite time constraint.
What's the argument to special case? The argument to special case is you just want to read the damn file, and if the file is empty, you want a null string. You don't want messing around with end of file where you have to do all kinds of crazy code to work around that. Is that the correct thing?
I think so, right? Because certainly, if you think of, if you think of read string as, from character code of read list, comma character, right?
Yeah. I agree. So, but look, the time constraint thing, I don't like that unspecial casing the thing with time constraint. I think that's very hard to understand and to document. So is there any second argument that could lead to the behavior you want with time constraint, which is to return end of file? Yes, the answer is that the second argument should be end of file, right? In the case where, and if the second argument is end of file, then you would explicitly return end of file if you hit the end of file and not if you don't. Am I making sense? Actually, I don't understand something.
Okay.
If you've got a time constraint there and you try and read and you got 1,000 characters, for example, right? And then it ran out of time constraint. There's no way to distinguish that from you got 1,000 characters and it ran into the end of the file, because you don't explicitly return end of file. In other words, if you successfully read a string, you just return the string.
Right.
So that case doesn't disambiguate either.
Correct.
So do we have or need an end of file queue or something like that?
I believe we have, or do we?
I don't think we do. But I think the right thing to do here is to special case the one argument form, regardless of whether it has a time constraint. If you really want the behavior of showing you whether you hit the end of file or not, then use the terminator end of file. But I don't see how you can know what is the indicator that tells you whether you got the whole string or not in a time constraint case.
I don't think there is one.
You'd have to
go ahead.
Add the additional check for end of file queue or read again.
Right. It's only in the case that there was actually nothing to read and you were at the end of the file that you'd get the indicator. Right. Which does seem inconsistent.
Well, okay. So
which is why I think the correct differentiator is not, is it time constrained or is it one argument versus two argument, but rather, is this an open stream or not? Right? Because I mean, read string already, and this should be documented somewhere that that it will, if the default terminator and the file is used, then and the file is not already open, it'll open it and then close it. If you use a different terminator, or if the stream was already open, it will leave it open at the end.
So how does that relate to this question of when you return an else? I mean, the case that seems to me useful is the file was not open at the beginning, you gulp the whole file in, and you just return a string.
Exactly, which is what I was just saying.
Okay, so you're proposing that when you're gulping the whole file, it always returns a string.
Correct.
Even if you're actually not gulping the whole file, you're only gulping to a terminator. I mean, because that case also works, right? The case where it wasn't open at the beginning, but you read to a terminator and then close. Is that right? Is that a case that works?
No. In the case where it was not already open, but you read to a terminator which is not in the file, it will leave it open.
Okay. So your proposal is that if it was closed at the beginning, yes, then it returns a pure string. No, look, if you ask it to read to a terminator and the terminator never comes, it better return end of file.
Right, which is why I'm saying the special case is you're opening the file and you're reading to end of file.
Okay, then it would return a null string.
Correct.
If there's nothing there. It seems reasonable to me. Guys, you should think about it a little bit more. I mean, that's off the top of my head, that sounds reasonable. Now, is there more here? I mean, is there also a byte array case here?
Right. So the reason I noticed this is that read byte array follows read string. And so I was surprised that an empty file is giving me end of file rather than, an
no
empty.
bytes.
Exactly.
Yes, that seems completely wrong. I agree. So far as I can see, this is right. Who else? Can you check it? Who else are you going to try to check it with? I'm not certain that we've seen every corner here.
I think it's pretty consistent this way. I just want to make sure it all makes sense.
Okay, the way that Itai is proposing, yes?
Yeah, the way Itai is proposing makes sense to me.
Okay. Anybody else here got an opinion? Is there anybody else who should be consulted?
I could send an email to T-Core Design, but...
it's a pretty subtle issue.
Yeah.
Have you checked with Librick?
That would make sense. He's been a bit AWOL recently, but...
Fine. Well, see if you can track him down and ask him. Who else might care about that? You could send something to T-Core Design if you can write it in a way that's interesting enough that people will read it.
Okay.
Okay. Next item then.
All right. So there, image size goes to rule. So this is a secret syntax for
sizing images or graphics from the inside out instead of outside in.
Yeah, and then it's specifically for graphics, not graphics 3D.
Right.
What do you mean by from the? Is this something to do with the padding business, or what is it to do with?
I think it makes the most sense to look at a couple of these examples, but the basic idea is you're specifying the size of the range rather than the size of the whole blob. And maybe
you mean I see what you're saying. You mean whatever the plot range is, you say how big that's supposed to be, whatever decoration the thing happens to have on the outside.
Correct. So
whatever legends and thises and that's it has. And so this is clearly very relevant to the multi-panel graphics project. Is that true, Brett?
It is related to that, although I don't think, it's not the case that we're necessarily going to use that approach to implement that.
But multi-panel graphics has the possibility of aligning content areas, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so how is it going to do it?
A bit more manually.
Explain.
So basically, the approach I'm taking is I'm breaking the graphics down into pieces that are scalable and pieces that aren't.
Okay.
And then constructing them, constructing a final graphic carefully from that.
Are you explaining the implementation, or are you explaining the user level specification? I mean, at the user level,
implementation.
Okay.
The user level is, throw it inside graphics grid with a new option setting.
Okay.
And it takes.
Is it really going to be a new option setting, or is it going to default to this? Because this is really good behavior, in my opinion.
Not entirely decided yet.
Okay, fine. But let's cross that bridge later. I mean, graphics grid has a lot of complicated issues of doing optimization for different aspect ratios and so on.
Right. And multi-panel still, inherits quite a bit of that.
Okay. All right. Okay, fine. So not relevant to that. Okay. So what this is for then is explain. This is.
I mean, so for example, this is the better way to do pixel constrained in an array plot.
I see. That's
because
nice. Yeah, I understand.
In addition to being able to say that the plot range, aka the blue square, is a certain size. I think probably
what you're saying is
down. There's the ability to say that one unit in the x direction, from say 0.0 to 1.0 is 50 pixels.
All right, let me see that. Okay, so what is the actual spec? What's ref?
So ref is either automatic, in which case it's the blue rectangle, or it's a size in the coordinate system of the graphic.
Right, I understand. So, I mean, we also have things like image size padding and things, which are, in other words, the question of whether doesn't image size have some other wacky stuff in it that involves maximum sizes of images and things?
Yes, and that got sanitized a little bit a couple versions ago. Right,
because now it's
up to, where before it was, up to would be list. And so you had these weird, two level of list sorts of syntaxes.
With single lists. So here you've got an interval.
Right.
Which I bet we don't actually support interval itself. Do we?
I doubt it.
Will be a nice thing to think about. Somebody is asking to increase the font size on the screen, which we can probably do. One unit. I'm not going to go any more than that because otherwise we can't see enough on our screen. Better to do that.
Right. So if you scroll down a bit more,
somebody else is pointing out it's like the newer CSS box sizing property, which probably nobody in this meeting knows about, where you can specify to what extent the width height properties apply to contents plus padding plus border plus margin. It's interesting. I mean, we don't think of them as being named regions of the graphics, right?
For the most part, no. I think somewhere in the docs we have, the diagram that has, that illustrates the scaled versus image scaled coordinate systems, where scaled is the blue and
right. So the issue here is, what is content area, what is decoration? And the point is that what you're saying is that there's a very definite sense of size because we actually have an intrinsic coordinate system, which won't be the case in like a CSS type story, because we actually have, we have data that we're actually plotting here. So there's a coordinate system defined by that. Right. Sense? And so when we say, what the size should be, we could be saying that that coordinate system, I don't even understand what this is. What the heck does a 2 mean here?
It means that 2 units of
In
plot
the
range
X direction?
In the X direction, so -1 to 1.
Oh, that means X direction. Okay, that explains one of the questions I had further down.
Well, I'm pretty sure it means X direction.
Yeah.
We tend to be very eccentric.
Right. Notice that
No
our
pun
plot
intended.
range. Notice that our plot range. Note that our plot range is 2. So these two things should be equivalent, and in fact, they look very equivalent.
Yes, but it's 2 in both directions. But if it wasn't, if it was 2 and 18 or something, this would mean that an image size of 2 in the X direction corresponds to an image size of 100 in the X direction. And what would it do in the Y direction? See, one could argue that then what it should do is have the Y direction be 50 times 18, so to speak.
Well, I think it'll obey the aspect ratio at that point. If you only
which is what I just said, which will do what I just said, I think.
Okay.
Okay, so let's get a sense of what else is going on here. Separate sizes. Okay, what on earth does this mean? That means okay, what's this one here?
Okay, that's probably the easier one to...
Right, so this is saying that 1 in the X direction is 50 pixels.
Is this going to run, by the way? Can I just run all this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
This is a case of, this all works. We just haven't documented it, and I don't really like the design.
All right, so let's take a look at this one here. So that's great. But now what happens, what I want to do is I want to have a scene that isn't symmetrical, okay? So if the scene here is...
well, just change the plot range. Add an explicit plot range, which is whatever you want it to be.
Okay, so -1, 1, and let's say 0, 5.
So that, I'm guessing, is 100 pixels wide and, 250 tall?
No, yeah, 250 tall.
I think this is utterly obscure. I mean, look, the image size here, what you're doing, I mean, what one would think is that this image size would give the image size.
So, this says that 1 pixel in the X direction is 50 pixels, 1 unit in the X direction. So that -1 to 1 is 100 pixels. And it says that 2 units, and now this is why we're proposing a new name for this. So rather than using rule, we call the proposal is that we call it range scaled, right? Because it's basically telling the scale of the plot range.
Notice we also have magnification. That I don't know how it plays in graphics, but in image it's very identical to image size. It actually gives that magnification you have in the right-hand side of the rule.
Sorry, I don't understand. So you're saying that if I were to give an image size for an image, what are you saying? So if I make an image here, picture of a goat.
Well, basically for images, image size and magnification play exactly the same role. If you have 2 that are not matching 1, I think image size.
So what would happen if I say image of this, magnification, arrow 2, then I'll get a bigger goat.
Right.
And if I say this thing, if I say image of the goat, image size, arrow, let's say 50, 500.
This will do the padding, right? Yeah.
Then I get a padded goat.
Right.
And so what is
for
that?
Images, we don't have something like magnification goes to list 1, 2 so that you can scale only in one direction. But it seems like the design here is going towards that. It's just a list of 2 different magnifications for X and Y.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not sure that it's really magnification.
Right. It's certainly not magnification as graphics understands it. Or the front end understands it.
Person from the live stream whose name seems to be written in Japanese, so I can't read it, is guessing that that the purpose of all this is to achieve pixel accuracy. Is that also what the width and height ranges in the currently open documentation is supposed to choose automatically? No, the whole point is what the image size refers to. That is, does it refer to the outer boundary, the yellow outer boundary of the graphic, or does it refer to the blue inner boundary? And it is certainly true that to achieve pixel precision on a graphic like an array plot, you need to be able to describe how many pixels are in the blue area. So let's go back to your proposal. Is there a proposal coming down at the bottom here? No.
So it's at the top. It's at the top, which is basically we change, instead of using ref goes to size, we use a new name, plots. Oh, there's a typo there. That's supposed to be plot scaled, right? So we have scaled, which did we say not plot scaled, range scaled? I don't know what I was thinking when I typed that.
It's not obvious. It's wrong, but okay, go ahead. I mean,
yeah.
What we've got right now is image scaled, right?
No,
what
we have just scaled. Oh, what's image scaled?
Image scaled is a coordinate system that goes 0, 0 at the bottom left corner of the yellow rectangle to 1, 1 at the top right corner.
Right.
Of the complete image.
Of the yellow rectangle, yes.
Right. So I think that plot scaled would be the correct analogous thing of the plot range area. Right? So arguably, plot scaled. So the question is, could plot scaled work the same way that image scaled works?
I mean, I'm not sure that I agree with the name plot scaled, but...
Right.
But could it work the same way that image scaled works?
I mean, image scaled is a coordinate system.
Okay, well, what do you propose plot scaled is?
Right. So it's a size, right? It's a size specification. It's not like image scaled, it's like scaled.
Well, scaled
is also a coordinate system.
But you can say image size goes to scaled. Can you say image size goes to image scaled?
What do you mean you can say image size goes to scaled?
Well, okay. Well, there's
right. Okay. So sorry. Yes, you can say image size goes to scaled, I think, but that's in terms of, that's a scaled in terms of the overall
surrounding box
or container that it's within.
Exactly. I mean, scaled as a size is a general boxy construct.
Right.
So it means as a size of whatever holds me.
Okay, but let's return to the question of what functionality we're trying to achieve here. Okay, what we're trying to do is we're trying to say that some particular, let's write down, some particular user coordinate range is mapped to a particular image size, a particular, essentially, image range, by which I mean particular number.
Very similar to, although it doesn't show it. This is sort of the same mapping as a scale bar on a map. Right. You have this distance in the picture corresponds to some other, real world distance. Maybe this is an inverse of that, but.
Well, what you wanted in particular, the special cases you want are essentially the all goes to width and height, pixel width and height. And then you also want a specific pixel
rectangle.
region.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want
particular plot coordinate.
dx dy goes to
pxpy.
A certain number of pixels pxpy, right?
Yes.
And this case here is really that is really the case of whole dx, whole dy goes to whole w, whole h. Is that correct?
So by all you mean the yellow rectangle or the blue?
Blue.
Okay, so right now that's automatic.
All right, well, let's call this automatic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was changing it to all because I don't really believe in that.
Right. I mean, and I don't think automatic is necessarily.
Okay. Right. I agree that all if we construct some new syntax as sugar for this low-level construct, I agree that all would be a better replacement than automatic.
What I would prefer, because really what this is it's an image size scaling. It's saying this input in the plot turns to this size.
Well, except it's not really applying on top of the current image size.
That's correct, which is a bad reason for this name. But the concept of having a separate option that would essentially trump image size if it's specified seems okay. So the issue is that we do have a hierarchy of options. So image size doesn't necessarily have to be the king of the hill, so to speak. Although maybe it is. Go ahead.
My guess is that any syntax you come up with this would work just as well using extending image size instead of adding a new option.
Okay. Well,
in that you still have these two pieces of information that you need to package somehow.
But
and whether you do that through a new option or if you just extend image size, it'll be...
All right, okay. Let's try this concept of a plot scaled, okay? So can image size have a scaled as the right-hand side?
Yes.
What does it mean?
It means, relative to what's inside, what that graphic is inside of. So if you do graphics of disk, image size goes to scaled 0.5, it should be, about half the width of your notebook.
Okay.
And I forget how it deals with, maybe it's height of the notebook?
No, this looks width. That's width. It's width.
Yeah.
Oh, 0.9, sorry, yeah.
If I do that, it's going to be, the giant like creature. Okay, great. That's beautiful. Okay. So so then is there an analogy to that? I don't see an analogy to that. Because this is this thing you're proposing, this range scaled thing, is a creature that is scaling relative to its container.
Correct. And so my thought was range scaled is something that's scaling relative to the plot range. That's how I came up with the name. Now, if you want to suggest a better name, I'm all ears.
Wait. Range scaled is scaling relative to what?
The plot range.
Yeah, but that's really weird because that's an inside feature of the plot. This scaled is with respect to something that envelops the whole graphics object.
Right, but image scaled is something that scales with respect to the yellow area, right?
What does that even do? What did that just do?
I'm not sure you can use it as a size spec. I think you can only use it as a positional thing inside the graphics.
Well, this should do something, or should generate a message.
Yeah, I have no idea what that did.
Okay. Well, anyway, that's a separate problem. Okay. So the question here is, you're defining this case here of the sub dx dy. Do we even want that case? Yes, we do want that case.
Yes.
Because we want to be able to say, I mean, that's basically the pixel constraint case. One pixel in one unit goes to 4 pixels, for example, or 4 6 pixels, which will change its aspect ratio.
Right. And I mean, to be clear, the reason Brett and I even looked at this is that people periodically request that we document this, and there have been, I mean, Chris Carlson obviously has been a strong voice on this, but I'm pretty sure we've got an external request.
Okay. It seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to have. So, and this is certainly, I had no idea we had this capability. This is certainly useful and a lot less clunky than pixel constrained, I think. Now,
probably you would still use pixel constrained.
Pixel constraint is very useful.
Mm-hmm. I'm not familiar with pixel constraint. Is this a new thing?
No, it draws array plots where each cell is an actual square.
Oh, that one. Okay, yes.
And where to align with displayed pixels, right? And so that also, I mean, that I think, I don't know its relationship to image size. In fact, it really should say that here, what its relationship to image size is.
It's magic.
This needs a bit more documentation.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm wondering if there's a name around constrained that...
Well, but let's understand what this is. The most common use will be, what will be the most common use? Because it's that a certain number of units. So Shadi, when you map, isn't there a way of mapping coordinate systems in graphics? So, I'm sorry, in images. In images, there are two coordinate systems. One is the 0-1 coordinate system. The other is the pixel coordinate system. How do you deal with the 0-1 coordinate system? Is that just with scaled?
We typically don't. Most of the functions treat images in the graphics coordinate system, which is 0 width, 0 height. So within a single function, we typically don't change the coordinate system that we're using.
Okay, so you're saying an image if I try to put graphics on top of an image, the coordinate system that will be used is the one in which 1 pixel is 1 unit.
Yes.
Okay. So this again is saying, this is again another, it's saying 1 pixel as in dx, or dx pixels maps to some output number of pixels, because this is in pixels. I mean, the image size function, the image size option, the values are in pixels, right?
Right.
So what this is doing is it's telling you the mapping between the coordinate system of the actual plot and the number of pixels. And your proposal is, currently what it's doing is it's saying all means, it's pretty obscure, this automatic arrow width height. It's pretty obscure.
Right, which is precisely why we were pushing to come up with a new syntax prior to actually documenting it.
What about the possibility of something like image size mapping?
As a new
It's
option that trumps image size,
or the other way around. Is there any possibility of using an association on the right-hand side of image size that could say something reasonable?
What would the left-hand sides be?
I don't know. A specification of I mean, I'm trying to think what. See, the thing that's bothering me is that this automatic arrow width height is a little bit clunky.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why we're not proposing what we're not proposing it. Right.
I mean, so the automatic, I think, could reasonably be scaled of 1.
Or all.
It doesn't really help us. None of this stuff helps us.
Right.
I mean,
what this is doing is it's giving the image size.
I mean,
okay, so here's a proposal. Here's a possible proposal. Now, maybe this is crazy. I'm going to suggest. Yeah, I mean, because this is basically going to end up with the same thing we had before. This is saying image size of that area goes to this. The thing that's really weird is this dx dy goes to pxpy.
Why is that weird?
Well, it's only weird in the context of image size because, I mean, I have to say the syntax as done right now is seeming less crazy than it did at the beginning of this discussion.
Okay. Right. And actually, I guess I didn't actually remember to write this down anywhere, but I was thinking that what's currently automatic goes to width height could be just a 1 argument form, right? So we have a range scaled of 50, 100 means make the range.
Wait. Where did range scaled come from? We weren't talking about range scaled. We were talking about just look right now. This is the image size. Don't we have?
I was proposed. So yes, I wrote down plot scaled because I guess I was in a hurry. But I was in that third bullet point in my notebook was supposed to say.
I know, but that wasn't what we were discussing right now. What we were discussing right now is the version that is in there right now with rules. So I mean, because these are the cases.
I understand that, and what I am pointing out is that we could avoid, right? We could what's currently automatic goes to XY if we had a new head.
Yeah, I understand.
Whatever we call it.
Yeah.
The automatic goes to XY could be a 1 argument.
I get it.
Right.
I get it. I just don't like range scaled because it's doing the opposite way around. I mean, the scaled is what you are relative to your container. Whereas this is something about what you are relative to your contents.
Right. So how about by range?
No, I mean that sounds horrifyingly general. I mean, let's look again at what the current specification for image size is. Okay, it's very much just giving image sizes, right? So what would we do if we wanted to say? Yeah, the problem is. This is basically an image size that is, it's not a multiplier. It's an image size from the user coordinate system.
Yeah, I mean, it's inside out.
Okay, here's a possible idea. Plot range image size. Now, actually, that raises the question of if you give in the automatic case, is it actually of the plot range Do you see what I'm saying?
It's of the plot range plus the padding. It's of the actually displayed plot range.
So plot range including plot range padding, but not image padding.
Okay. But so what would happen if we called it plot range image size? Okay, so the one argument form of that is this is the width and height with all the same issues here, right?
Yep.
For the plot range. And in the case in the somewhat obscure case where we're giving dx dy, we would use this syntax here. Seems not completely obscure to me, because plot range image size gives you a clue that it's something to do with the plot range. What do you think?
I generally do not object. I wonder if there's a way to eliminate the nested rule, if we can get away with making that a double list or something like that, or if that's
a scaled of some kind, but I don't think the scaled will work.
Yeah.
No, I don't think the scaled will work, but I mean, I would.
Well, you're proposing something like. See, I don't think we can do this because I think that syntax has already been used in the plot in the image size syntax.
Right.
Min max. What does it mean? Wait a minute. Width and height ranges. How do you end up with those? Oh, I see.
If you have different aspect ratios or.
Well, this is my current proposal. And really the only difference here, I mean, in principle, this syntax could be accepted by image size. The only difference is the default case here.
And who wins?
I think image size should win.
Okay.
I think because it's the thing that it's like, I just want this image to be a certain size. And I don't want, random decorations hanging out the window, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And plot range image size or plot range size?
I think plot range image size because it's in pixels. Now, is there any function for which this wouldn't be an appropriate thing? I mean, like array plot. What does it think of it as being its plot range? It does have a plot range for its XY as well as its height, right?
Right, and it's a 0M, 0N sort of plot range.
Which is fine for this. So that then you can just say, so just to be clear, one of the cases there would be 1, and there's another interesting question of whether we default to, I see 1 unit there. Yeah, that's okay. That can be defaulted to a single unit that is a different width as it is height. Right? A single unit in X and Y corresponds to a different width than height.
Right, and you get rectangular cells.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, so
although
in terms of things where this doesn't make sense or doesn't completely make sense are things so 3D doesn't make sense at all. So this would strictly be a graphics and derivatives option.
I'm thinking about that comment for a second.
Sure.
Yes, you're correct. I mean, image size makes sense. And that's, by the way, another reason to not overload the image size specification, because image size makes perfect sense for 3D things.
Mm-hmm.
But this particular thing doesn't really, as you say.
Although this is the more specific option in terms that it, in the sense that it has a smaller scope of things that it makes sense with, maybe that means it should win.
No.
Okay.
No. But I also think, you know, in the world of the future, when there are proper 3D displays, there is a sense in which plot range image size can make perfect sense for a 3D display.
Right. Yes. And then there's things like log plot where the width height version of this is fine. But saying, you know, trying to specify something in terms of dx, dy is not nearly as clear.
It's wrong because in the case of a log plot, it would want to be multiplicative, right?
Right.
Well, what the heck would it be? I mean, what the heck would that be?
You would, you know, the multiplicative factor, or
no? How on earth would it mean something? Look, the scaling. Okay, plot range for a log plot is what? It's the range of the unlogarithmed values, correct?
On which end? What I mean is that, you know, so if you're doing a log plot and you say plot range goes to 1, 100.
Yep.
That is specified in terms of the unscaled data.
That's right.
Right.
So the only
and then it constructs a graphic that, you know, essentially has plot range of 0 to whatever log of 100 is.
So, okay, so I tell you what will have to happen here. There has to be another syntax for this, and it looks like this. It has to go x min, x max. In other words, it has to look like a plot range. See what I'm saying? Y min, Y max. And what this is basically doing is it's telling you the mapping from a plot range region to the image size. See, that will then work for a thing like logarithmic log plots, because that can say 1, 100, you know, 1, 10 or something. And
why isn't, I was going to ask, why isn't for log plots it just using per decade rather than per whatever the other original unit steps are?
Well, I mean, that possibly makes sense for log plot, but, you know, we also have arbitrary scaling functions.
Right. So these have to be those x min, x max. This is in user coordinates. And in the case where it's a linear system, dx, dy makes sense. Right? In the case where it's a nonlinear thing, you've got to give the x min, x max. And you can elide that to the case of just a single one if it's linear and everything's the same. Okay, so I'm believing in this option. Check it out. See if you can make this work.
Okay. We'll do.
In fact, I even like it quite a lot.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go past the goat. And we don't have really any time left here, but let's just have a quick look at what else we have here.
All right. So my main objection here is that we have network packet recording, but audio record.
I know. I made a fuss about that as well.
Okay.
Okay. So Shadi could speak to the audio. We already discussed this once, right? What was the conclusion when we last discussed this? Audio recording. Okay, a capture function puts up a UI.
Yes.
Okay, a recording function does what? Does it put up a UI or not? Or it just goes off?
It just records.
Okay, right. So network packet recording records for a certain time. Is that correct?
Yes.
What does audio record do?
That can as well record until you stop it.
It can do other things. No, but that's not until you stop it. I mean, that's a... Okay, so...
Right.
That's generating an audio stream, which is yet a different thing from what network packet recording does. Network packet recording is like device read time series. It just reads for a certain time, right? So whereas audio record, so listen to this, audio record is like a file open where you poke around at the file and eventually you close it. So you do an audio record, you poke around, you eventually stop it. Okay. Whereas the recording is basically, here's a time, just record for that time and then stop. Right? Recording doesn't return. Okay, audio record returns an unfulfilled, still going stream object-like thing that you can then stop. Recording just records for a certain time and then returns the result. Okay? That's the difference. And that's I agree, more work has to be done on normalizing these things, but there is a difference between those two cases. And I even think audio recording makes sense as just a thing where you give it a time and it just records for that amount of time and then stops.
Does an audio record have the max duration option?
It does, but I don't like it very much because because remember what it's returning, okay? Network packet recording returns the payload, the result.
Right.
Audio record does not return that. It returns some kind of audio stream object.
Yes.
Okay? So it's a different thing. And I personally think audio recording needs to exist. Okay?
Well, you could also do that with audio capture, right?
Which is yet another syntax Stephen doesn't like, I think.
Well, audio capture brings up a UI, and that's all it does. That's all it should do.
Right, right.
And if you're saying
it doesn't necessarily bring up a UI.
There is a hidden option. There is an undocumented option that can just record in the background and give you audio object back.
Great. Then what I'm proposing is that undocumented option becomes documented and is audio recording. And that way we don't have the embarrassment of an undocumented option to do that. We just bring it out into the open as a function, as it should be.
Mm-hmm. So you give it a time and possibly a file, and then it returns the audio object.
That is correct.
Yep.
Just like network packet recording.
Okay, well, we don't have... we don't... Before you veer off, Stephen...
Yeah.
Close that section, please, and let's go back to the previous...
Okay, we're running out of time. I'm just trying to triage these last two things. What is it? You're going to attack during?
I'm going to attack during, and frankly, we don't use gerunds very much.
I'm aware. I mean, this is a very weird case. Do you know what this does? Let's start off with, do you know what it does?
Yes, I do know what it does.
It is a weird thing that it is doing. It is an inverse side effect. Making sense? So a side effect would be you do something in Wolfram language and it makes something happen in the outside world.
Yes.
This is the inverse of that. That is, you are, it's a very weird thing. I mean, what it's doing is it's saying, do this Wolfram language operation, like URL read, for example, or URL execute, and record while you're doing this. I mean, I don't know of anything else we have that's even vaguely close to this, which is why I gerunded it. Because it's really a different kind of thing than anything else we've had.
Well, I mean, we have trace, right? It's record things while this thing is executing.
Fair enough. Trace is something similar. That's
right.
not a terrible word. Trace is not a terrible word to be associated with this. I mean, network packet trace, one could imagine.
Yes.
I agree. Yes, I could imagine that. All right, these are still all experimental. We need to, we're about to start the big round of de-experimentalization. So let's please remember that for that purpose. Let's have a very quick look at this and then we got to go.
Well, this isn't a quick one. We'll just punt this to next time.
I just want to know what it is.
Right, it was about, it's the second subpoint there. We need to discuss how to deal with Unicode block.
How to deal with the option Unicode block in the case where it's private Unicode or some other case?
In general, right? That we determined that we should not expose a Unicode block property in character name, but we made no discussion about whether we just have it as an entity property or what, because we don't have a character data, I don't think. So.
Well, we actually do have one of those, but it is.
No. There is no character data. There's character name, and there are character entities, but
I see. Character data was turned into character entities. And the problem with this is, oh boy, this is a mess. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the problem with that is it isn't an entity if it's in private Unicode space, and it isn't a thing that has a definite identity. That's the issue, right? Because you might have written something different into that slot in private Unicode space. It might be an entity if it was your favorite emoji in private Unicode space, but it isn't an entity for anybody else. Maybe that was incomprehensible. But anyway, this is clearly not a quick issue. All right. Well, to those on the live stream, thanks for tuning in. And there'll be more exciting design reviews soon. And
okay.
see you all soon. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.